Hey guys, tonight we are wandering through the mists of early medieval Ireland, a land of emerald hills, ancient ring forts, and a profound sense of the magical just beneath the surface of the everyday. Imagine you're trekking across a dew-laden field, the air cool and smelling of damp earth and distant peat smoke. Suddenly, you come across a tall, weathered pillar stone, standing solitary against the gray sky. It's not just any stone. Running up its sharp edge are a series of curious straight lines and notches, like some ancient, secret code. These are Ireland's whispering stones, the enigmatic Ogham stones. And tonight, we're going to try and decipher their silent messages, particularly the tantalizing idea that they might hold not just names from the past, but perhaps even coded prophecies. If you were an early medieval Irish scribe, trying to jot down a quick grocery list using this system on a wobbly bit of wood, well, you probably wouldn't survive this historical deep dive without developing a strong preference for very, very straight carrots and an even stronger respect for those who mastered this linear art. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support helps these ancient whispers reach new ears and keeps our historical explorations going. I'm always fascinated to see our global community gather, so please do drop your location and local time in the comments below. It's a quiet joy to see where you're all listening in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in Ireland, sometime between the 4th and 7th centuries AD. This is a period of profound transformation for the island. The Roman Empire, which never conquered Ireland, is crumbling across the water in Britain. Christianity is beginning to take root, slowly intertwining with, and sometimes challenging, the deeply ingrained pagan beliefs of the Celtic peoples. It's a liminal time, a threshold between old ways and new, and it is in this fertile ground that the Ogham script flourishes, primarily on these stark, upright pillar stones. These stones are not grand, intricately carved monuments like those of Egypt or Rome. They are often simple, unshaped monoliths of local stone, granite, sandstone, slate, chosen for their height and, crucially, for a naturally straight edge or arris. It is along this edge that the Ogham inscriptions are cut. As you run your fingers gently over the cool, weathered surface, you can feel the distinct groups of incised lines. Some are short, perpendicular strokes, others are longer, oblique slashes. They are arranged in groups, sometimes on one side of the edge, sometimes on both, sometimes crossing it. It's a tactile script, one that could almost be read by touch in the dim light of a longhouse or the gloom of an Irish winter. There's an undeniable aura of mystery about these stones. They stand as silent sentinels in the landscape, often in remote or evocative locations, beside ancient trackways, near burial grounds, or marking territorial boundaries. What secrets do they hold? Whose names do they commemorate? And what of these whispers of coded prophecies? Were these stones merely memorials? Or did they serve a deeper, perhaps more magical or divinatory purpose in the minds of the early medieval Irish? A mainstream historical fact is that Ogham is an early medieval alphabet used primarily to write the earliest known form of the Irish language, called Primitive Irish or Archaic Irish. Around 400 Ogham inscriptions are known on stone monuments scattered across Ireland, with significant concentrations in the southwestern counties of Kerry, Cork, and Waterford. More have been found in Wales, Scotland, the Isle of Man, and even a few in England, reflecting Irish settlement and influence. The air around these stones feels thick with untold stories. The wind sighs through the nearby gorse, perhaps carrying faint echoes of the voices that carved these lines, the people whose lives and deaths these stones were meant to mark. This isn't just about deciphering an ancient alphabet. It's about trying to hear the whispers of a long-vanished world, a world where stone and script held a potent connection to identity, memory, and perhaps the very fabric of fate. One quirky tidbit is that the Ogham script is sometimes referred to as the Celtic tree alphabet, as later medieval scholars associated each letter with the name of a tree. While this tree association is a strong and beautiful part of Ogham's later mystique, its historical accuracy for the earliest period of stone inscriptions is debated by modern scholars. It's a lovely idea, though, an alphabet rooted quite literally in the landscape. Maybe it was an early attempt at eco-friendly writing, this message sponsored by the local Oak Appreciation Society. Historians still argue whether the Ogham script was invented entirely independently in Ireland, or if its creation was influenced by contact with the Roman world and the Latin alphabet, or perhaps even by Germanic runic scripts. Its unique linear form sets it apart, but the underlying principle of alphabetic writing suggests some level of external stimulus. So, you stand before one of these ancient, inscribed pillars, the lines like silent runes against the weathered stone. The mystery is palpable. These are Ireland's whispering stones, and tonight we begin our attempt to listen to their coded messages, seeking not just names and lineages, but perhaps a hint of the prophecies they are rumored to hold. You are standing before one of these enigmatic Ogham stones, its edge scored with clusters of lines and notches. Your fingers trace the cool, weathered grooves, and you wonder what exactly is this strange, linear script. How does it work? This isn't the flowing cursive of a medieval manuscript or the blocky capitals of a Roman inscription. Ogham is something altogether different, a unique product of the early Irish mind, an alphabet that seems to spring from the very landscape itself. Let's now take a closer look at the structure of Ogham, often called the tree alphabet, though its true arboreal connections are a matter of some debate, especially for its earliest form. At its core, Ogham is an alphabet consisting of 20 primary characters, or feta letters. These are arranged into 4 groups, or Ogham families or classes, each containing 5 letters. The genius, and perhaps the initial bafflement, of Ogham lies in how these letters are represented. Instead of distinct, complex symbols like our modern A, B, C, Ogham uses simple straight or angled strokes. The number and orientation of these strokes, relative to a central stem line, usually the natural edge or iris of the stone, determine the specific letter. Imagine the edge of the stone as that central stem line, the first Ogham, called Ogham Beath, named after its first letter. Beath, associated with birch, consists of letters made by 1 to 5 perpendicular strokes, incised to the right of the stem line if you're looking at the stone face-on, and the inscription reads upwards. So, 1 stroke to the right is B. Beath, 2 strokes is L. Louis, 3 is F. Fairn, 4 is S. Sale, and 5 is N. Neon. It's like a very minimalist tally system. The second Ogham Huatha, named after Huath, Hawthorne, uses 1 to 5 perpendicular strokes incised to the left of the stem line. 1 stroke to the left is H. Huath, 2 is D. Dare, 3 is T. Tin, 4 is C. Cole, and 5 is Q. Quirt. Notice the Q. This is important as it represents a sh-w sound found in primitive Irish, but later lost in Old Irish, helping to date the script's origins. The third Ogham Muin, named after Muin, vine or bramble, consists of 1 to 5 longer, oblique strokes that cross the stem line diagonally. 1 diagonal stroke is M. Muin, 2 is G. Gort, 3 is N. G. Ngaadal, representing a sound like the eng in sing. 4 is st or z strafe. Its exact sound value is debated, and 5 is r ruis. The fourth Acme, ailme, named after ailm, pine or fir, is a bit different. It represents vowel sounds, and its letters are made by 1 to 5 short perpendicular notches directly on the stem line itself, or sometimes as very short strokes crossing it. 1 notch is ailm, 2 is on, 3 is ur, 4 is dad, and 5 is dad. So, there you have it. 20 letters, formed by groups of 1 to 5 strokes, differentiated by their orientation right, left, diagonal or form notches for vowels. It's an incredibly logical and systematic approach, almost like a proto-Morse code, but for carving on stone rather than tapping on a telegraph. 1 stroke right, 2 left, 3 diagonal. Hang on, did I just spell elf or ask for more mead? The potential for confusion if you weren't paying attention seems quite high. A mainstream historical fact is that the Ogham alphabet, with its 4 groups of 5 letters, is well established from the earliest stone inscriptions. Later, in the manuscript tradition from around the 7th century onwards, when Ogham was studied by monastic scholars, a 5th group of 5 supplementary letters called forfeda, extra letters, was added, primarily to represent sounds found in Old Irish that weren't easily covered by the original 20, or to represent diphthongs and other specific phonetic values. These forfeda, however, are rarely found on the early stone monuments. The direction of writing is also distinctive. Most Ogham inscriptions on stone are read vertically, from bottom to top, often starting on the bottom left edge of the stone, running up, sometimes across the top, and then down the right edge if the inscription is long enough. This upward reading is quite unusual compared to most European scripts. One quirky tidbit is how the script naturally lends itself to the edges of stones. The eris provides the perfect ready-made stem line. It's a script designed for its medium, which is rather clever. It makes you wonder if someone looked at a sharp-edged rock and thought, that would make a great spine for an alphabet. Historians still argue about the exact phonetic values of some Ogham letters, particularly those like Q court and STZ strafe, and how these values might have changed over the centuries as the Irish language itself evolved. The interpretation relies on comparative linguistics, later manuscript traditions, and the spelling of known names in the inscriptions. Understanding this basic structure, the 4 aikmai, the 5 strokes, the stem line, is your first step to reading these ancient stones. It transforms those seemingly random scratches into a deliberate, ordered system of communication, a unique alphabet born of the Irish landscape and the ingenuity of its people. The tree alphabet, whether literally about trees or not in its inception, certainly has a very organic, almost elemental feel to it. You now have a basic grasp of the Ogham script itself, those intriguing lines and notches climbing the edges of ancient Irish stones. But where did this unique alphabet come from? Who invented it, and why? As you ponder these questions, you delve into a fascinating mix of myth, legend, and scholarly debate. The origins of Ogham are shrouded in the mists of early Irish history, with traditional accounts crediting a divine inventor, while modern scholarship looks for more earthly, linguistic inspirations. It's a classic case of Ogma's gift versus Latin's echo, or perhaps a bit of both. Let's start with the mythical origin, as preserved in medieval Irish manuscripts, particularly the Aure Septnan Isis, the Scholar's Primer, a 7th century text that discusses the Irish language and grammar, including Ogham. According to this tradition, Ogham was invented by Ogma, a champion and god of eloquence and poetry among the Tuatha De Danann, the mythical pre-Christian deities of Ireland. The story goes that Ogma created Ogham as a secret script for the learned, and that the first message written in it was a warning to another deity, Lugh, about his wife's potential abduction. Each letter was said to be named after a tree, supposedly because Ogma was inspired by the different woods he encountered. This divine poetic origin story embedded Ogham deeply within Irish cultural identity and linked it to wisdom, magic, and the sacredness of language. It's a rather more romantic origin story than, say, somebody needed a better way to label their mead barrels. This connection to Ogma, sometimes spelled Ogmios by Gaulish Celts, where he was often equated with the Roman Hercules or Mercury, and depicted as an old man leading people by golden chains attached to their ears from his tongue. Symbolizing his eloquence gives Ogham a prestigious, almost divine, pedigree. If a god invented it, it must be pretty special. However, modern scholars, while appreciating the richness of the mythology, tend to look for more historical and linguistic explanations for Ogham's origins. A mainstream historical fact is that most contemporary scholars believe Ogham was created sometime between the 1st and 4th centuries A.D., likely in Ireland or by Irish speakers in Britain. Its structure, while unique, shows evidence of being influenced by or developed in response to existing writing systems, particularly the Latin alphabet. One prominent theory is that Ogham was devised as a way to write the primitive Irish language using a system that was easy to carve on stone or wood, perhaps as an alternative or a supplement to the Latin script, which was becoming known through Roman Britain. The 5-stroke system for each Acme group of letters has a tally-like quality, and the phonetic values of many Ogham letters correspond fairly closely to those of the Latin alphabet. For example, B, L, S, N, D, T, C, M, R, A, O, U, E. I all have fairly straightforward Latin equivalents. The presence of a Q quirt in Ogham, representing a co-sound that existed in primitive Irish but not in contemporary Latin, which used QV, suggests a deliberate adaptation to the specific sounds of the Irish language. Another theory proposes that Ogham might have been influenced by Germanic runic alphabets, as there was contact between Irish and Germanic peoples. However, the structural differences between runes and Ogham are quite significant, making this less likely as a primary source, though some cross-influence can't be entirely ruled out. A more intriguing idea, and one that connects back to the secret script notion from the myths, is that Ogham might have been developed as a cryptic or cipher alphabet by a learned class, perhaps the Druids or early poets Philid, possibly for magical, divinatory, or specialized communication that they didn't want easily read by those initiated only in the Latin script. The fact that inscriptions are often just names and lineages doesn't preclude an earlier or parallel use for more esoteric purposes on perishable materials like wood. One quirky tidbit is the sheer number of different origin stories for Ogham that appear in medieval Irish scholarly texts, sometimes even within the same manuscript. It's as if the medieval Irish scholars themselves were fascinated by the script's beginnings and enjoyed speculating or collecting different traditions, much like modern historians do. Some tales even link its invention to the Tower of Babel, as an attempt to create a perfect language after the confusion of tongues. Talk about ambitious. Historians still argue about the precise impetus for Ogham's creation. Was it primarily a practical tool for monumental inscriptions? Was it a nationalistic response, a way for the Irish to have their own script distinct from Roman Latin? Or was its genesis more rooted in intellectual or esoteric circles? The truth is likely a complex blend. And without a smoking quill, a definitive account from its actual inventors, we are left to piece together clues from the script itself, its archaeological context, and the later, often mythologized, traditions. So, whether a divine gift from Ogma, a clever adaptation of the Latin alphabet by early Irish scholars, or a secret code of the Druids, the Ogham script emerged as a unique and enduring feature of early Irish culture, a testament to linguistic ingenuity and a deep reverence for the power of the written or carved word. You're standing before an Ogham stone, its rugged surface bearing the telltale lines and notches. You understand the alphabet's structure, and you've pondered its mythical and scholarly origins. Now, let's get practical. How were these inscriptions actually made? Carving precise lines onto the hard, often uneven edge of a large stone pillar, exposed to the elements, was no mean feat. It required skill, the right tools, and a clear understanding of the script. You are now imagining the ancient artisan, a stone carver or perhaps a learned individual, carefully etching these messages for eternity, or at least for as long as stone endures. The first step, of course, was selecting the stone itself. As we've noted, Ogham inscriptions are typically found on upright pillar stones, often unshaped or only roughly hewn, utilizing a natural vertical eris or edge as the stem line. This was a clever choice, as the edge provided a ready-made guide for the incisions. The type of stone varied by locality: granite, sandstone, slate, whatever was available and suitable. Some stones were clearly chosen for their prominence, or perhaps for pre-existing significance in the landscape. Once the stone was selected and presumably erected, if it wasn't already a standing stone, the inscription process could begin. The tools used would have been simple by our standards, but effective in skilled hands. A sharp, pointed iron tool, like a chisel or a punch, would have been used, struck with a mallet or hammer. The carver would need to be precise, ensuring the correct number of strokes for each letter, their correct orientation, right, left, or diagonal, and their proper spacing to form legible words. Remember, these inscriptions were meant to be read, often as public memorials. A sloppy Ogham inscription would be like a modern tombstone full of typos, not ideal. Here lies Fionn, son of, is that 3 strokes or 4? Oh dear, this could be awkward at the next clan gathering. The process would likely have involved some planning. The inscriber would need to know the full text beforehand and mentally, or perhaps by lightly sketching on the stone map out how it would fit along the available edge or edges. Given that most inscriptions run from bottom to top, the carver might have started low and worked upwards. This orientation is interesting. It's as if the message is ascending, or perhaps easier to carve consistently in that direction on an upright stone. The depth and clarity of the incisions would also be important, ensuring they would remain legible despite centuries of weathering from Irish rain, wind, and frost. Some Ogham stones found today have inscriptions that are faint and worn, readable only with careful examination and good lighting or by making rubbings, while others remain remarkably crisp and clear. The skill of the original carver and the resilience of the stone itself play a large part in this. A mainstream historical fact is that the craft of stone carving was well established in prehistoric and early historic Ireland, as evidenced by megalithic art like at Newgrange and later Christian high crosses. The Ogham carvers were part of this long tradition of working with stone, though their Ogham script was a unique graphic form. Consider the physical effort: holding a chisel steady against a rough stone edge, striking it repeatedly with a mallet to create neat lines of specific lengths and angles, often in an outdoor setting, exposed to the weather. It required patience, strength, and a steady hand. It wasn't a quick job. A long inscription could take many hours, or even days, to complete. One quirky tidbit is the occasional presence of what appear to be mistakes or corrections in Ogham inscriptions. Sometimes a character seems to have been recut, or an extra line added or effaced. These rare instances give us a humanizing glimpse of the carver, reminding us that these were not machine-made objects, but handcrafted memorials, susceptible to human error, perhaps a momentary lapse in concentration, or a slip of the chisel. Oops, that was definitely meant to be an owl, not an ass. Hope nobody notices after a few centuries of lichen growth. Historians still argue whether Ogham carving was a specialized craft practiced by a few trained individuals, or a more widespread skill that any literate person in Ogham at least could undertake if they had the basic tools. The quality of inscriptions does vary, suggesting a range of skill levels. Some are very neat and professional, others are more rustic. It's possible that for important memorials, a skilled carver was employed, while for more minor markings, a local individual might have done the work. So, as you visualize that ancient artisan, patiently chipping away at the stone, each stroke deliberate, each notch carefully placed, you gain a deeper appreciation for these monuments. They are not just repositories of a forgotten script. They are a testament to human skill, a tangible record of effort and intent carved into the enduring landscape of Ireland. The lines on the stone edges are a direct link to the hands that made them centuries ago. You've marveled at the skill required to carve Ogham onto stone, and you've pondered the script's origins. Now, let's turn to the language itself that these intriguing lines and notches represent. When an Ogham stone speaks, what tongue is it using? The answer is Primitive Irish, also sometimes called Archaic Irish. This is the earliest known form of the Irish language, the ancestor of Old Irish, Middle Irish, and ultimately Modern Irish Gaeilge. As you decipher these stone-carved messages, you are hearing some of the very first recorded voices from Ireland, faint but distinct echoes from a pivotal period in the island's linguistic and cultural history. Primitive Irish belongs to the Goidelic or Gaelic branch of the Celtic languages. It was spoken in Ireland, and by Irish settlers in parts of Britain during the period when Ogham inscriptions were being made, roughly from the 4th to the 7th centuries A.D. This language was significantly different from Old Irish, which is the language of most early Irish manuscripts from the 7th-8th century onwards, written in the Latin alphabet. Primitive Irish was more archaic. More inflected meaning words changed their endings more extensively to indicate grammatical function, and phonetically closer to the common ancestor it shared with other Celtic languages like Brittonic, the precursor to Welsh, Cornish, and Breton. Think of it as Irish in its beta version, still recognizably Irish, but with some features that would later be streamlined or lost. The Ogham alphabet was specifically designed or adapted to represent the sounds of Primitive Irish. For example, the letter Q-kiert in Ogham represented a Q sound that was common in Primitive Irish and in Proto-Celtic, but had disappeared by the Old Irish period, typically becoming a hard K spelled C. So, a name that might appear with a Q in an Ogham inscription like Mackie, meaning son of, would later appear with a C in Old Irish manuscripts Mac. This phonetic shift is one of the key reasons scholars can date the Ogham stone inscriptions to this earlier linguistic period. It's like finding an ancient document that uses thee and thu. It immediately tells you something about its age. A mainstream historical fact is that Ogham inscriptions are the earliest written records of the Irish language. They provide invaluable, if limited, evidence for the state of the language before the more extensive manuscript tradition began with the arrival of Latin literacy through Christianity. The vocabulary found in Ogham inscriptions is, as you might expect from memorial stones, somewhat restricted. It primarily consists of personal names and kinship terms. You see names like Cunaguso's hound choice, Vedacuna's hound of the sacred tree, poem, or Lugu Deca's servant of the godlach. These names often have clear Celtic roots and can sometimes be linked to names found in later Irish sagas and genealogies, though the spelling and form are more archaic. The most common kinship term is Mackie, meaning son of, genitive singular of Maccas, followed by the father's name in the genitive possessive case. So, a typical inscription might read Name Mackie, name B, meaning stone of name A, son of name B. Sometimes you also find AV grandson of, or other terms indicating tribal affiliation or ancestry. Because the inscriptions are so formulaic, mostly X son of Y, they don't give us flowing prose or poetry directly from the primitive Irish period. However, they are incredibly important for historical linguists. They provide snapshots of personal names, grammatical endings, especially genitive case endings like as, os, I, and phonetic features that help reconstruct the evolution of the Irish language. It's like having a few precious, fossilized words from a much larger, lost linguistic ecosystem. One quirky tidbit is that some Ogham names sound quite different from their later Old or Modern Irish forms, due to sound changes that occurred over centuries. It's a reminder that languages are living, evolving things. The Lugudekas on an Ogham stone is an ancestor of the later Lugade found in sagas. It's like looking at a very old family photo and seeing familiar features in an older style of dress and hairstyle. Historians still argue about the extent to which the orthography spelling system of Ogham was standardized across different regions or over time. There are variations in how certain sounds are represented, and some inscriptions are difficult to interpret due to weathering or idiosyncratic carving. Deciphering and accurately translating these ancient voices requires careful linguistic analysis and comparison with later forms of Irish and other Celtic languages. So, as you trace those lines and notches, remember that you are not just looking at abstract symbols. You are encountering the preserved voices of early medieval Ireland, speaking in a language that, while ancestral to modern Irish, has its own unique cadence and character. These stones are linguistic fossils, offering precious, if brief, utterances from a distant past. You've learned about the Ogham script and the primitive Irish language it records. Now, let's turn to the primary purpose of these enigmatic stone monuments. While whispers of coded prophecies and secret druidic lore add to their mystique, the vast majority of Ogham inscriptions that have survived and been deciphered serve a much more straightforward, though profoundly important, function. They are memorials. These stark pillar stones, with their cryptic linear messages, were predominantly erected to commemorate individuals, to etch their names and lineage into the enduring stone, ensuring they would not be forgotten. You are essentially standing in an ancient open-air cemetery where the headstones speak in a forgotten tongue. The typical Ogham inscription, as we touched upon, is remarkably consistent in its formula. It usually consists of a personal name in the genitive case indicating possession, so the stone of X, often followed by Mackie son of, and then the father's name, also in the genitive case. So, a common reading would be X Mackie Y, meaning the stone memorial of X, son of Y. Sometimes, this lineage extends further. For example, X Macquai Y Macquai Z, X son of Y, son of Z, or using AVI grandson of or other kinship terms like Makoi, which seems to denote affiliation with a larger kin group or tribe. This focus on naming and lineage is paramount. This practice of creating stone memorials for the dead was not unique to the Ogham users. Of course, upright stones, menhirs. Stele had been used as markers or memorials in various cultures for millennia. However, the Ogham inscriptions personalized these stones in a new way for early Ireland, literally inscribing the identity of the commemorated individual onto the monument itself using their own distinctive script. It was a way of fixing a name to a place, a memory to the landscape. Imagine the solemnity of erecting such a stone for a departed chieftain or family member. The act of carving their name ensuring their presence would linger, a silent testament to their life and their connection to that land and kin. It's a far more permanent Facebook memorial post, carved to withstand centuries of Irish weather. Here lies Dongal, son of Irk. He was a good lad, bit prone to exaggeration about his fishing catches, but otherwise solid. A mainstream historical fact is that the primary function of Ogham stones was commemorative, serving as gravestones or cenotaphs monuments for individuals buried elsewhere. The names recorded are overwhelmingly male, suggesting a focus on commemorating prominent men, chieftains, or heads of lineages within a patriarchal society. The placement of these memorial stones is also significant. Many are found in association with older burial sites, such as ring barrows or cist graves, suggesting they were continuing or elaborating upon existing sacred or commemorative landscapes. Others are found along ancient trackways or boundaries, perhaps marking the resting place of someone who died there, or serving as a prominent memorial visible to travelers. The act of naming the father, and sometimes the grandfather or tribal group, was crucial in a society where kinship, lineage, and social status were paramount. These were not just individual memorials. They were statements of identity, ancestry, and belonging. They rooted the individual within their family and their broader social group, reinforcing the bonds that held early Irish society together. One quirky tidbit is that a very small number of Ogham stones commemorate women. Though these are rare exceptions, when they do occur, they often use the formula ANM name X Inigena, daughter of Y. The overwhelming male focus of most Ogham memorials speaks volumes about the social structures and power dynamics of the time. Historians still argue about whether all Ogham stones necessarily mark a literal burial site. Some may have been cenotaphs, erected in honor of someone who died and was buried elsewhere, perhaps lost at sea or in a distant battle. Others might have had a more symbolic commemorative function, not tied to a specific grave but to the memory of an important ancestor or event. The term memorial stone is often preferred as it encompasses these various possibilities. So, as you stand before an Ogham pillar, the wind whispering around its weathered edges, remember that you are likely in the presence of an ancient farewell. The lines and notches are not abstract patterns, nor primarily as far as evidence shows complex prophecies. They are names, painstakingly carved, names of individuals who lived, loved, fought, and died in early medieval Ireland. These stones were their way of saying, "I was here, this was my lineage, remember me." They are names etched for eternity, or at least for as long as stone can endure the passage of time. You've come to understand Ogham stones primarily as memorials, etching the names and lineages of the departed into the Irish landscape. However, their purpose was not always solely commemorative. These inscribed pillars also played a significant role in the social and legal fabric of early medieval Ireland, acting as important markers of land ownership, tribal territories, and other significant places or claims. As you trace the Ogham lines, you might not just be reading a name, but a silent declaration, "This land belongs to the kin of X," or "Here lies the boundary of Y's people." The stones, in this sense, were anchors in a world where land and lineage were inextricably linked. In a predominantly non-literate society like early medieval Ireland outside of the emerging monastic centers, clear, permanent markers of territory and ownership were crucial for maintaining social order and avoiding disputes. Ogham stones, With their inscribed names often linked to specific kin groups, mucoi denoting an affiliation could serve this function admirably. Placing an Ogham stone bearing the name of an ancestor or a prominent lineage member on a piece of land was a public claim to that territory. It was a way of saying, "This land has been ours since the time of our forefather X, whose name is here recorded." It's like a very old, very heavy, and rather difficult to forge property deed. See this rock? It says, "Property of Clan O'Malley. Keep off the grass, or else." These stones were often erected in prominent locations that would have been easily visible, along roadways, on hilltops overlooking valuable land, or near important resources like rivers or good pasturage. Their very presence was a statement. They were not just passive markers. They were active participants in the social landscape, asserting claims and defining relationships between different groups. A mainstream historical fact is that Ogham stones are frequently found in locations suggestive of boundary marking, either between individual landholdings or larger tribal territories. Their inscriptions, focusing on personal names and lineage, would have been understood by contemporaries as asserting ancestral rights to the land. The connection to lineage is key here. In early Irish society, land was typically held not by individuals in the modern sense, but by extended kin groups, or, fine pronounced roughly, fine. Rights to land were often based on descent from a common ancestor. An Ogham stone commemorating such an ancestor would therefore validate the kin group's claim to the surrounding territory. It was a tangible link to the past, a proof of long-standing occupation and inheritance. Consider the effort involved in quarrying, transporting, erecting, and inscribing these large stones. It was a significant investment of resources and labor, not undertaken lightly. This effort underscores the importance of what these stones represented, whether a revered ancestor or a crucial territorial claim. It wasn't something you did on a whim. One quirky tidbit is the occasional discovery of Ogham stones that appear to have been deliberately defaced or even reinscribed by later groups. This could indicate territorial disputes, where a new group sought to erase or supplant the claims of previous occupants by damaging their ancestral markers. It's a very direct form of historical revisionism, literally set in stone. That Ogham stone, claiming this valley for Clan MacGuffin, never heard of him. Let's just adjust the inscription a bit. Historians still argue about the precise legal weight these Ogham stone markers carried. Were they considered definitive proof of ownership in disputes, or more symbolic assertions of traditional rights? Early Irish law tracts, which were written down later, often discuss land tenure and boundaries in great detail, but they don't always explicitly reference Ogham stones as legal documents in themselves. However, the sheer persistence of the tradition suggests they held considerable social and symbolic authority. So, as you encounter these silent sentinels, remember that they are more than just gravestones. They are deeply embedded in the social and political landscape of early medieval Ireland. They are marking lands, defining kin, asserting claims, and silently testifying to the intricate web of relationships that governed this ancient society. Each stone is a piece of a larger map, a map of lineage, territory, and belonging, etched onto the very fabric of the Irish countryside. You are now familiar with the Ogham script and the primary functions of the stones as memorials and boundary markers. Let's get a little closer to the messages themselves. What do these inscriptions, these X Maci Y formulae, actually tell us while they might seem simple? Deciphering these ancestral lineages offers a fascinating window into early Irish personal names, kinship structures, and the very sound of the primitive Irish language. You are, in essence, becoming a genealogical detective, piecing together family trees from a time before written censuses or detailed parish records. As we've established, the most common Ogham inscription formula is a personal name in the genitive case, followed by Mackie son of, and then the father's name. Also in the genitive, for example, an inscription might read Dalagny Mackie Daly, which translates to the stone memorial of Dalagnas, son of Dallas. The A ending on Dalagny and Daly is a common genitive singular ending in primitive Irish for names of a certain declension class. Another example could be Ercagny Mackie Ercaidonas, meaning the stone memorial of Ercagnas, son of Ercaidonas. These names themselves are a rich source of study. Many are clearly Celtic in origin, often composed of recognizable elements. For instance, names containing Cuna or Con, like Cunagusos, relate to hound or wolf, a common heroic or warrior motif in Celtic cultures. Names with Lugu, like Lugudecas, refer to the important pan-Celtic deity Lugh. Others might refer to personal characteristics, animals, or even abstract concepts. Studying these names helps linguists trace the evolution of Irish naming practices and the vocabulary of the primitive Irish language. It's like discovering a very old phone book, but instead of numbers, you get insights into ancient culture and language. Wolf Choice, son of Wolf Brave. Sounds like a family that really liked wolves, or perhaps they just had a very enthusiastic dog. Sometimes, as mentioned, the lineage goes back further. A&M Tegan Mac Deglin, name, Tegan, son of Deglin, might be followed by Avi Corby, grandson of Corb. This tracing of ancestry was clearly very important. In a society structured around kinship, knowing your lineage defined your place, your rights, and your obligations. These stones were public declarations of that lineage. A mainstream historical fact is that the corpus of Ogham inscriptions provides the earliest contemporary written evidence for Irish personal names. These names are invaluable for understanding the phonology and morphology of primitive Irish and for tracing the etymology of later Irish names. The spelling on Ogham stones can sometimes be a bit creative, or at least not entirely standardized. This isn't surprising for an early script used across different regions and possibly by carvers of varying literacy levels. You might find the same name spelled slightly differently on different stones. These variations, however, can also be clues for linguists, indicating phonetic shifts or dialectal differences. One quirky tidbit is that some Ogham inscriptions are bilingual, featuring a Latin inscription alongside the Ogham. These are particularly common in Wales and parts of Britain where Irish settlers interacted more closely with the Romano-British population. These bilingual stones are incredibly valuable, acting as mini Rosetta Stones, as the Latin inscription can help confirm the reading and meaning of the Ogham text. For example, a stone might have Sagrani Fili Cunotemi in Latin of Sagranus, son of Cunotemos, and the equivalent in Ogham. This makes the decipherment process a lot less like inspired guesswork. Historians still argue about the social status of the individuals commemorated on Ogham stones. Were they all chieftains and warriors, the elite of society, or did the practice extend to other, perhaps less prominent, free landowners? The effort involved in creating a stone monument suggests a certain level of status, but the exact threshold is unclear. The names themselves don't always explicitly denote rank. So, as you carefully trace the strokes and notches, sounding out these ancient names, Dalagnas, Ercagnas, Cunagusos, you are connecting with individuals from over 1,500 years ago. These are not just abstract linguistic data points, they are the names of real people, their memories literally set in stone by their loved ones or kin. Deciphering these ancestral lineages is like hearing faint, individual voices call out from the depths of early medieval Ireland, reminding us of the enduring human desire to be remembered. We've focused so far on Ogham as it appears on stone, those impressive pillar monuments that have weathered the centuries. This is indeed where the vast majority of surviving Ogham inscriptions are found, their durability ensuring their message, however brief, endures. But was stone the only medium for this unique script? You now explore the tantalizing, if often elusive, evidence suggesting that Ogham was also used on more perishable materials, particularly wood. This opens up the possibility that Ogham was a more versatile and perhaps more widely used script in its heyday than the stone inscriptions alone might suggest. Used for messages, lots, or other everyday or ephemeral purposes. The very nature of the Ogham script, with its straight lines incised along a central stem, lends itself beautifully to carving on wood. Imagine a small wooden stave, a piece of smoothed branch, or even a flat wooden tablet. The edge of the wood would serve as the natural stem line, just like the arris of a stone. Carving Ogham onto wood with a knife would have been relatively quick and easy compared to the laborious process of inscribing stone. This practicality suggests that wood might have been the primary medium for Ogham in many contexts, with the stone inscriptions being reserved for more permanent, monumental purposes like memorials or boundary markers. It's like the difference between jotting a note on a piece of scrap paper versus engraving it on a bronze plaque. One is for everyday use, the other for posterity. Medieval Irish literary sources, though written down centuries after the peak of Ogham stone carving, frequently mention Ogham being written on wood. Tales from the Ulster cycle and other sagas often depict heroes or druids cutting Ogham messages onto rods or staves of yew or other woods. These messages could be warnings, challenges, magical charms, or even love notes, though probably not the most romantic-looking script for that. For example, in the famous epic Tain Bo Cuailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley, the hero Cuchulainn cuts an Ogham inscription on an oak withe as a challenge to the invading army. These literary references, while not direct historical proof for the 4th to 7th centuries, strongly suggest a persistent tradition and cultural memory of Ogham being used on wood. A mainstream historical fact is that while stone Ogham inscriptions are the most numerous survivors, early Irish legal texts and sagas frequently refer to Ogham being inscribed on wood fid, meaning wood or tree is related to fida, the Ogham letters. This literary evidence strongly supports the idea that wood was a common, if not the primary, medium for Ogham writing. The problem, of course, is preservation. Wood is organic and decays relatively quickly in most environments, especially the damp Irish climate. Unlike stone, wooden Ogham inscriptions would rarely survive for archaeologists to find. However, a few precious and often debated examples of what might be Ogham on small wooden objects have been reported from waterlogged sites or other contexts conducive to preservation. These are rare and often difficult to interpret definitively, but they offer tantalizing hints. If an early medieval equivalent of a to-do list written in Ogham on a stick ever turns up, it would be an incredible find. 1. Sharpen spear. 2. Plunder neighboring cattle. 3. Remember anniversary of Great-Uncle Fergus's Ogham stone dedication. The potential uses of Ogham on wood are vast. Short messages, personal tallies, lots for divination casting inscribed sticks to foretell the future, magical charms, or even educational tools for learning the script, all are plausible. This would make Ogham a much more integrated part of daily life and learning than if it were confined solely to monumental stone inscriptions. One quirky tidbit is the idea found in some later Irish scholarly traditions that different types of wood were associated with different Ogham letters, tying into the tree alphabet concept more fully. If this reflects an older belief, then the very choice of wood for an Ogham message might have added another layer of meaning or magical potency. Perhaps a warning was best carved on a thornwood, or a message of protection on rowan. Historians still argue about the extent and nature of Ogham usage on wood during the script's primary period, 4th to 7th centuries AD. While the literary evidence is strong for its existence, the lack of widespread archaeological finds makes it difficult to determine how common it was, what kinds of messages were typically written, or how its use on wood might have differed stylistically or functionally from the stone inscriptions. It's one of the great what-ifs of Ogham studies. So, as you look at those enduring stone pillars, remember that they might represent only a fraction, the most permanent and public fraction, of Ogham's original usage. Imagine a world where Ogham was also a lighter, more portable script, carved onto staves and tablets, carrying messages, knowledge, and perhaps even prophecies that have long since returned to the earth, leaving only faint echoes in myth and the occasional, precious archaeological find. The whispers of Ogham might have once filled the wooden halls and forests of Ireland, far beyond the cold, silent stones. We've explored Ogham as a script for memorials, boundary markers, and potentially everyday messages on wood. But there's another layer to Ogham's mystique, one that pulls it from the realm of the purely practical into the shadowy world of sacred knowledge, esoteric learning, and perhaps even magic. This is the connection of Ogham to the learned classes of ancient Ireland, the Druids in the pre-Christian or early transitional period, and the Philid singular Fili, who were a hereditary class of poets, seers, and lore-keepers. You are now pondering whether Ogham was more than just an alphabet. Could it have been a secret script, a repository of hidden wisdom guarded by these intellectual and spiritual elites? The idea of Ogham as a druidic script is a popular one, often fueled by romantic notions of Celtic mystery. The Druids, as described by classical Roman writers and faintly echoed in Irish myth, were the priests, judges, philosophers, and keepers of sacred knowledge in pre-Christian Celtic society. If any group were to devise or use a special script for their esoteric teachings, for divination, or for magical incantations, the Druids would be prime candidates. However, direct, contemporary evidence linking Druids specifically to Ogham is scarce, as the Druids themselves left no written records, and their practices were already in decline or being transformed by the time Ogham stone inscriptions become common in the 4th century AD. The golden age of classical Druidism was somewhat earlier. More concretely, Ogham is strongly associated in later Irish tradition with the Félid. These were highly trained and respected individuals who preserved the oral history, genealogies, laws, and poetry of their people. They underwent years of rigorous training, memorizing vast amounts of lore. The Aure Sept Nanasis, the scholar's primer, which attributes Ogham's invention to the god Ogma himself, a figure of eloquence and learning, is essentially a textbook for this learned class. It discusses Ogham not just as an alphabet, but as a complex system imbued with deeper meanings, including the famous association of its letters with trees. This suggests that for the Félid, Ogham was more than just a way to write down names. It was a key to understanding the deeper structure of language, nature, and perhaps the cosmos. It was their professional, scholarly script. A mainstream historical fact is that the Félid in early medieval Ireland held a high social status, often serving as advisors to kings and chieftains. Their knowledge of Ogham, law, history, and poetry was a source of their power and prestige. They were the guardians of tradition and learning. If Ogham was indeed a specialized script of this learned class, It might have been used for purposes beyond simple commemoration. Could it have been used to record genealogies in more detail than seen on the stones? To write down poems or stories, to inscribe magical charms or divinatory formulae on wooden staves or other perishable materials? The later manuscript tradition, where Ogham is often discussed in a context of cryptic writing, glosses, and magical alphabets like various shield Oghams or bird Oghams, certainly hints at such esoteric applications. It's like the difference between the public-facing website of a company and their internal, coded R&D documents. The stone Oghams are the public memorials. But perhaps there was a whole other world of Ogham usage that was more private and specialized. Psst, want to see some really secret Ogham? This one can supposedly make your neighbor's prize-winning pig fly. Don't tell anyone I showed you. One quirky tidbit is the story of the Tarbface bull feast, a ritual described in some Irish sagas for choosing a new king. It involved a man eating the flesh of a white bull, drinking its broth, and then sleeping while 4 druids or fillid chanted over him to induce a prophetic dream revealing the rightful successor. While Ogham isn't explicitly mentioned in all accounts of such divinatory rituals, it's easy to imagine how a special script believed to hold inherent power might have been incorporated into such practices, perhaps for casting lots or recording the dream's interpretation. Historians still argue about how secret Ogham truly was in its earliest period. While its use on public monuments suggests a degree of public legibility, at least for the names, the complexity of the later manuscript lore surrounding it, and its association with the highly trained fillid, implies that deeper knowledge and applications of Ogham may have been restricted to an initiated elite. Was it a script with multiple layers of meaning? The simplest, accessible to many, but its profounder secrets reserved for the few. Pondering Ogham in this context, you see it not just as lines on stone, but as a potential key to a hidden world of ancient Irish intellect and spirituality. It whispers of a time when poets were seers, when language itself was seen as a magical force, and when a simple series of strokes could hold the weight of ancestral lore, poetic inspiration, and perhaps the very secrets of the universe, guarded by those who knew how to read between, or rather, along the lines. We've explored Ogham as a memorial script, a boundary marker, a possible tool for everyday messages, and a specialized alphabet of the learned classes. But what about the most tantalizing aspect of our topic tonight, the idea of Ogham stones holding coded prophecies? This is where the whispers become truly alluring, conjuring images of ancient seers carving predictions of future kings or dire warnings of impending doom onto these silent sentinels. But how much of this is historical reality, and how much is romantic embellishment or later folkloric interpretation you are now sifting through the evidence, or lack thereof, for Ogham as a direct medium for foretelling the future? Let's be clear from the outset. The vast majority of surviving Ogham inscriptions on stone, when deciphered, are quite mundane in their content. As we've seen, they are primarily personal names and lineages: X son of Y, Z grandson of Q. There are no clear, unambiguous examples of stone Ogham inscriptions that read as direct prophecies in the sense of, "In 3 winters a great famine will come," or "A red-haired king will rise from the west." If such prophetic messages were ever carved onto the stones that have survived, they are either so deeply coded as to be unrecognizable, or they simply haven't been found. The primary, archaeologically attested function of stone Ogham is commemorative and genealogical. So, where does the idea of coded prophecies come from? It seems to stem largely from a few intertwined sources: the mythical associations of Ogham, its depiction in later Irish sagas and literature, and perhaps a more general human tendency to imbue mysterious ancient writings with hidden, profound meanings. Remember the mythical invention of Ogham by the god Ogma. He was a god of eloquence and poetry, and in Celtic traditions, poets filled were often also seen as seers, capable of divination and prophecy. If Ogham was the special script of this learned, divinely inspired class, it's a short leap to imagine it being used for their prophetic utterances. The Aurea Sept na Nessus and other medieval Irish texts discuss Ogham in contexts that sometimes hint at divinatory or magical uses, beyond simple writing. These later scholarly interpretations, though written centuries after Ogham's peak on stone, helped to build its mystical reputation. A mainstream historical fact is that while Ogham stones primarily function as memorials, the script itself, in later Irish manuscript traditions and folklore, became associated with divination, magic, and secret knowledge. This later perception has likely influenced modern popular ideas about the stones holding prophecies. Furthermore, Irish sagas, written down in the medieval period but often drawing on older oral traditions, sometimes depict Ogham being used in ways that suggest magical or prophetic power. For instance, Ogham might be used to cast a spell, to lay ageas a magical prohibition or obligation, or to convey a secret message with significant implications. In these stories, the ability to read and write Ogham correctly, and to understand its deeper meanings, is often a mark of great wisdom or magical skill. It's easy to see how these literary portrayals could lead to the idea that the actual stone inscriptions might also hold such hidden, powerful messages. It's like how movies about ancient Egypt often have hieroglyphs triggering curses or revealing treasure maps. Even if most real hieroglyphs are more about praising pharaohs or recording temple accounts. One quirky tidbit is that some forms of divination mentioned in Irish texts involved casting lots, sometimes made of yew wood inscribed with symbols. If Ogham was used on these wooden lots, as some scholars suggest is plausible, then specific Ogham characters or sequences might have been interpreted as omens or answers to questions about the future. This is a more direct, though still somewhat speculative, link between Ogham and a form of prophecy, but it relates to Ogham on wood, not necessarily complex prophetic statements carved on public stone memorials. Historians still argue whether any Ogham stone inscriptions contain deliberate, hidden layers of meaning beyond the literal names. Could some names have been chosen for their numerological value, or their association with specific trees if the tree alphabet idea was already current, thereby conveying a secondary, perhaps prophetic or magical message to those initiated enough to understand it? This is very difficult to prove or disprove from the inscriptions alone. Most scholars remain skeptical of overly elaborate, hidden code theories for the stone texts, preferring to focus on their more straightforward, commemorative, and linguistic value. So, while the image of an ancient Irish druid carving a detailed prophecy onto a standing stone is a romantic and compelling one, the direct evidence from the stones themselves doesn't really support it. The coded prophecies associated with Ogham stones are more likely a product of the script's inherent mystery. Its connection to a learned and spiritually potent class, the Fillid, and its vibrant afterlife in Irish mythology and folklore. The stones do whisper. They whisper names, lineages, and a sense of connection to a distant past. Whether they also whisper the future is a far more elusive, and likely more metaphorical, question. While the cold, hard evidence on Ogham stones themselves points primarily to memorials and boundary markers, the story of Ogham takes a more fantastical turn when we delve into the world of early Irish sagas and mythology. These rich narrative traditions, mostly written down by Christian monks from the 7th century onwards, but often preserving much older, pre-Christian oral lore, depict Ogham not just as a practical script, but as a tool imbued with magical potential. used for secret messages, potent charms, and even forms of divination. As you immerse yourself in these ancient tales, you see how Ogham, in the Irish literary imagination, truly did carry whispers of something beyond the mundane. In the sagas, Ogham is frequently associated with heroes, druids, poets, fillid, and kings, the very people who would have possessed specialized knowledge or power. The act of carving Ogham is often portrayed as a significant, sometimes ritualized, event. For example, in the Tainbo Quailnge, the cattle raid of Cooley, the boy hero Cú Chulainn famously cuts an Ogham inscription on a four-branched oak hoop and places it in the path of Queen Medb's advancing army. The inscription serves as a challenge and a warning, and Medb's druids must be called upon to decipher it. This episode highlights Ogham's use for conveying critical messages and the necessity of specialized knowledge to interpret it. It's not just any old graffiti, it's a potent communication from a formidable warrior. Read this, if you dare. Spoilers, you're probably all going to have a very bad day. Ogham is also sometimes depicted as having inherent magical power. Inscriptions might be used to cast spells or lay a magically enforced taboo or obligation upon someone, the very letters. Perhaps because of their association with trees which held deep significance in Celtic spirituality, or with the god Ogma, were thought to hold power that could be unleashed through their correct carving and invocation. This is a step beyond simple communication. It's using the script as an active magical agent. A mainstream historical fact is that many early Irish sagas, such as those of the Ulster cycle featuring Cú Chulainn and the Fenian cycle featuring Fionn mac Cumhaill, contain references to Ogham being used for various purposes, including messaging, challenges, and sometimes in contexts suggesting magical or divinatory properties. These literary attestations, while not direct proof of 4th century practices, reflect a long-standing cultural association. Divination is another area where Ogham appears in these tales. While the details are often vague, there are hints that Ogham characters, perhaps carved on yew staves or other pieces of wood, fidlana or wood lots, could be cast and interpreted to foretell future events or gain hidden knowledge. This aligns with the broader Indo-European tradition of using lots or runes for divination. The Fillid, with their role as seers, would have been the likely practitioners of such arts. Imagine a tense scene in a king's hall, the Fili casting his inscribed staves, the fate of a battle, or the success of a harvest hanging on their interpretation. One quirky tidbit from the manuscript tradition is the development of various cryptic or scholastic forms of Ogham, such as Ogham Cole, Ogham of Sea, where each vowel was replaced by two C's, Ogham Adlin, acrostic Ogham, or even Oghams based on bird calls or colors. These were likely intellectual exercises or mnemonic devices for scholars and poets, further demonstrating the fascination with Ogham as a system that could be manipulated and imbued with multiple layers of meaning. Well beyond its simple alphabetic function, it's like medieval Irish Sudoku, but with more trees and less numbers. Historians still argue about how much these later literary depictions of Ogham reflect actual practices from the period when the stone inscriptions were being made, 4th to 7th centuries, versus how much they represent later elaborations, romanticizations, or misunderstandings by medieval authors looking back on a partially lost tradition. It's a common challenge in dealing with texts that record much older oral material, separating the historical kernel from the literary chaff. Nevertheless, these sagas and mythological accounts are invaluable. They show us that in the cultural memory of Ireland, Ogham was far more than just a way to write names on stones. It was a potent symbol of learning, of poetic power, and of a connection to the deeper, often magical, currents of the world. It was a script believed capable of carrying challenges, binding oaths, and perhaps even whispering glimpses of what was to come. The Ogham of myth may not be the Ogham of a typical roadside memorial, but it's a vital part of its enduring mystique. The Ogham script, with its unique linear charm, once graced countless standing stones across Ireland and parts of Britain, and likely filled many a wooden stave with messages, memorials, or even magical formulae. But like all writing systems, its period of widespread, practical use eventually came to an end. As you trace the fading strokes on a weathered stone, you're witnessing the twilight of this ancient alphabet. The rise of a new religion, Christianity, and the accompanying spread of a more versatile and internationally recognized script, the Latin alphabet, gradually led to Ogham's decline as a primary means of written communication. The transition was not sudden, but a slow eclipse. Christianity began to gain a firm foothold in Ireland from the 5th century onwards, famously associated with Saint Patrick, though its arrival was a more complex and gradual process. With Christianity came monasticism, and monasteries became the great centers of learning and literacy in early medieval Ireland. These monks were, of course, primarily literate in Latin, the language of the Church, the Scriptures, and classical scholarship. They used the Latin alphabet not only to write Latin, but also to begin writing down the Irish language itself, developing an orthography for Old Irish based on Latin letters. This was a momentous development, leading to the rich manuscript tradition that preserved so much of Ireland's early literature and laws. Compared to the Latin alphabet, Ogham had certain limitations, especially for writing longer texts or for use on materials like parchment in manuscripts, while perfect for carving short, formulaic inscriptions on stone edges or wooden staves. Its linear, additive nature made it somewhat cumbersome for extensive prose. The Latin script, with its distinct letter forms and established conventions for writing on vellum, was simply more efficient and adaptable for the needs of the new learned class and the burgeoning manuscript culture. It was like comparing a very specialized tool, perfect for one job, with a more versatile multi-tool. Ogham was great for stone edges. Latin was good for almost everything else in a monastic scriptorium. A mainstream historical fact is that the adoption of the Latin alphabet by Irish scholars for writing Old Irish, starting around the 7th century, gradually superseded Ogham as the primary script for the Irish language. Ogham continued to be understood and even used in limited specialized contexts like glosses in manuscripts or by antiquarians for centuries, but its use for monumental inscriptions largely ceased after the 7th or 8th century. As Christianity became the dominant religion, pagan practices and symbols, including perhaps some of the more esoteric or magical associations of Ogham, would have been discouraged or reinterpreted through a Christian lens. While Ogham itself wasn't necessarily seen as inherently evil, indeed, monastic scholars studied it and preserved knowledge of it, its primary function as a monumental script for a society with different religious and social structures became less relevant. Churchyards, with burials often marked by simple graves or, later, Christian-style crosses, replaced the older tradition of Ogham pillar stones in many areas. However, the memory of Ogham and its significance did not entirely vanish. As we've seen, it was preserved in scholarly texts like the Aure Septnan Aces, and it continued to feature in sagas and mythological tales. It became an object of antiquarian interest, a symbol of Ireland's ancient, pre-Christian past. It's like how we still learn about Roman numerals today, not for everyday calculations, but for their historical and stylistic value. Ah yes, Ogham, that charmingly impractical alphabet our ancestors used, terribly chic for very short messages, though one quirky tidbit is that some later Ogham inscriptions, particularly those found in Scotland, often on Pictish symbol stones or those in manuscripts, show adaptations or even misunderstandings of the original script, sometimes blending it with runic or Latin characters, or using the forfeta later supplementary letters in ways that differ from the classical stone Ogham. This shows a tradition in flux, being remembered and reinterpreted. Historians still argue about the social and cultural factors that contributed to Ogham's persistence in certain areas or contexts even after the rise of Latin literacy. Was it a conscious assertion of native identity in the face of new cultural influences, or did it simply survive longer in more remote regions or within specific learned lineages that maintained older traditions? The fading strokes of Ogham on weathered stones tell a story of cultural change, of old ways giving way to new. The script that once declared the names of chieftains and marked the boundaries of tribes gradually fell silent as a living tradition of monumental inscription. Yet, its unique form and its deep connection to the Irish past ensured it would not be entirely forgotten, waiting patiently for later generations to rediscover its secrets and ponder its whispers. The Ogham stones, those silent sentinels of early medieval Ireland, stood for centuries in fields and along ancient trackways, their linear inscriptions slowly weathering, their original meanings fading from common knowledge as the script itself fell out of widespread use. For a long period, they were simply enigmatic features of the landscape, their purpose perhaps only vaguely remembered in local folklore. But then came a period of rediscovery, a renewed scholarly interest that sought to unravel the secrets of these stone carvings. You are now witnessing how antiquarians, archaeologists, and linguists in more recent centuries began to shine a light back onto Ogham, transforming these mysterious markers from objects of local curiosity into invaluable sources for understanding Ireland's deep past. The serious study of Ogham inscriptions began in earnest in the 19th century, an era of burgeoning antiquarianism and a growing academic interest in Celtic languages and history. Scholars like Bishop Charles Graves, Sir Samuel Fergusson, and later, linguists such as Rudolf Thurneisen and R. A. S. McAllister played pivotal roles in collecting, transcribing, and attempting to decipher the Ogham texts. They meticulously documented known stones, searched for new ones, and applied the principles of comparative philology to understand the primitive Irish language preserved in the inscriptions. It was painstaking work, often involving difficult field conditions, deciphering worn carvings, and grappling with a script and language that had no direct modern equivalent. Imagine trying to learn an alphabet where your only textbook is a series of faint scratches on a windswept rock. Right, 5 strokes to the left. That's either a Q or a particularly enthusiastic caterpillar. This is going to take a while. These early scholars relied heavily on later medieval Irish manuscript sources, like the Ore Sept Nan Aces and various glossaries, which preserved the key to the Ogham alphabet, the letter names, their order, and their values. Without these manuscript traditions, which were maintained by monastic scribes who still had some knowledge of Ogham, deciphering the stone inscriptions would have been infinitely more difficult, perhaps even impossible. It's a testament to the continuity of learning in Ireland, even as scripts and languages evolved. A mainstream historical fact is that the systematic collection and linguistic analysis of Ogham inscriptions, particularly from the 19th century onwards, has allowed scholars to reconstruct significant aspects of primitive Irish phonology, morphology, and onomastics, the study of names, providing a crucial bridge between Proto-Celtic and Old Irish. As archaeological methods developed in the 20th and 21st centuries, the study of Ogham stones became more sophisticated. Excavations around the stones could reveal their original context, whether they were associated with burials, settlements, or boundaries. Scientific techniques could be used to study the stone itself, the tool marks of the carvers, and even sometimes to help date the inscriptions more precisely, though direct dating of carvings is very difficult. High-resolution photography and 3D scanning technologies now allow for incredibly detailed recording and analysis of the inscriptions, even those that are badly weathered. It's like giving these ancient stones a digital spa day, revealing details hidden for centuries. One quirky tidbit is the scholarly feuds that sometimes erupted among early Ogham researchers. The interpretation of certain inscriptions or the theories about Ogham's origin could be fiercely debated, with prominent academics exchanging strongly worded papers and occasionally less than collegial remarks. It shows how passionate people can become when trying to unravel historical puzzles, even if the puzzle is just a series of lines on a rock. Historians still argue about the interpretation of some of the more unusual or poorly preserved Ogham inscriptions. While the basic formula is well understood, some stones present unique challenges: non-standard letter forms, unclear word divisions, or names that don't easily fit known patterns. Each problematic stone is a mini-mystery, inviting fresh analysis and debate. The modern understanding of Ogham's stones is a far cry from the days when they were simply druids' altars or objects of purely local superstition. Thanks to generations of dedicated scholars, we can now read most of the inscriptions, understand their linguistic and historical context, and appreciate their significance as memorials, boundary markers, and precious remnants of Ireland's earliest written heritage. The stones still hold an aura of mystery, of course, but it's a mystery increasingly illuminated by knowledge. The scholars, in their own way, have helped these ancient stones to whisper their secrets once more. Our journey through the world of early medieval Irish Ogham stones, from their misty landscape settings to the intricacies of their script and the whispers of coded prophecies, is now drawing to a gentle close. We've seen them as memorials to the dead, as markers of land and lineage, as a unique linguistic record, and as objects of enduring fascination and scholarly debate. As you stand once more before these silent sentinels, their weathered edges etched with the faint lines of a long-lost communication, you are left to ponder their lingering whispers and the enduring questions they still pose. The Ogham stones, in their stark simplicity, are powerful reminders of a specific time and place, an Ireland on the cusp of profound change, where ancient Celtic traditions were encountering the new currents of Christianity and Latin literacy. They speak of a people deeply connected to their landscape, their ancestors, and their intricate social structures. The names they bear, Cunagusos, Lugudekas, Dalagnas, are no longer just abstract sounds. They are echoes of individuals who lived, died, and sought to be remembered in this green and often rain-swept land. While the grand, sensational idea of coded prophecies carved into these stones for all to see seems to be more a product of later romanticism and folkloric embellishment than a primary function, there's a softer, more subtle kind of prophecy they do hold. They prophesy, in a way, the endurance of memory. By inscribing names onto stone, these early medieval people were making a bid for immortality, a hope that future generations would see these markers and remember those who came before. In that, they succeeded. We are still reading their names, still pondering their lives, still trying to hear their voices across the centuries. That's a kind of prophecy fulfilled. A mainstream historical fact is that Ogham stones represent a unique and indigenous writing system of Ireland. offering invaluable insights into the early stages of the Irish language and the social customs of the period. Their study continues to contribute to our understanding of early medieval Celtic Europe. The mystery of Ogham is not entirely dispelled, and perhaps that is part of its enduring charm. While scholars can now confidently read most of the standard inscriptions, questions remain. What was the full extent of Ogham's use on perishable materials like wood? What were the precise circumstances of its invention? What deeper layers of meaning, perhaps known only to the initiated Fillid or Druids, might have been embedded within the script or its associated tree lore? Beyond what the surviving stones tell us, these unanswered questions keep the stones alive, objects of ongoing inquiry and imagination. It's like a good mystery novel where you get most of the clues, but the ultimate why still has a few tantalizing gaps. One quirky tidbit is the modern resurgence of interest in Ogham, not just academically, but also artistically and spiritually. People get Ogham tattoos, create jewelry with Ogham inscriptions, or use the Ogham characters in contemporary Celtic-inspired art and spirituality. It shows how these ancient symbols can still resonate and find new meanings in a world vastly different from the one in which they were first carved. The whispers are still being heard and reinterpreted. Historians still argue, and likely always will, about the finer points of Ogham scholarship, the precise phonetic value of a rare glyph, the exact dating of a particular stone, the full social implications of the naming patterns. But the broader picture is clear. These stones are a precious, tangible link to a pivotal period in Irish history, a time when the island was forging its unique cultural identity. As you turn from these ancient markers, let their silent, linear beauty stay with you. They are more than just old rocks with scratches. They are monuments to memory, to language, to a people seeking to leave their mark on the world. The Ogham stones stand as quiet guardians of a lost era, their faint prophetic whispers not of grand future events, but of the enduring human need to connect, to remember, and to be remembered, long after our own brief time is done. And so, as the mists gently swirl once more around those ancient, inscribed stones, and the soft green hills of Ireland fade into the quiet landscape of your mind, our journey with the Ogham script and its enigmatic whispers draws to a peaceful close. We have touched upon the lives of those who carved them, pondered the names they sought to make immortal, and wondered at the deeper meanings that might still lie hidden within those simple, elegant lines. The Ogham stones, in their stoic endurance, have shared some of their secrets. Speaking of lineage, land, and a language that echoed through Ireland over a millennium and a half ago, while grand-coded prophecies may remain more in the realm of legend than literal stone-carved fact, the stones themselves are a kind of prophecy fulfilled, a testament to the lasting power of remembrance and the enduring human desire to leave a trace, a name, a story for those who follow. Let the image of these silent sentinels, standing firm against the passage of time, now become a gentle anchor as you drift towards slumber. May the mysteries they still hold not trouble your mind, but rather add to the quiet wonder of a world rich with history and stories yet to be fully understood. There are no more lines to decipher tonight, no more ancient names to sound out, only the peaceful, even rhythm of your own breath, leading you into a deep and restful sleep.